Hi everyone and welcome to our tutorial on creating a realistic rust effect using only acrylic paints. Today I'm going to guide you through step-by-step process allowing you to transform your artwork with an authentic touch of a weathered charm. Now the reason, first of all, why I'm calling it like like the ultimate base coat for your rust effects is because it's got so much use and versatility depending on what you're trying to create with your rust and weathering effects. So first of all, it's like my go-to base for no matter what I'm painting with rust, and the main thing, it can go from like power armor to weapons, and it also acts for me. I also sometimes do this when I'm creating like the base coat if I'm going to have some chipping medium on top and I want it to be really highly rusted. Now it is achieved by just using only acrylic paints that are regularly available on the market. However, towards the end of this video I will go into a few more step-by-step processes that we can add just to take it to that next level of weathering and give it that real oomph and realistic look weathering. That was a bit of a tongue twister. Anyway, let's jump into the video. So some tools that we're going to be using to help apply this, we can either use some like old dry or stipple brushes, but my favourite way is using the sponge method with also like these crocodile clips, or you can use some tweezers, whichever one is easier for yourself. I personally do like the sponge one. It's just sponge packaging that you can get from anywhere. A lot of people ask me where I get mine from. It's just literally from the Games Workshop packages that arrive, like Forge World or whatever, or just some that you get in the packet. Or another way is go to your local like shop, and if you can get like some sponges that you clean cars with, that'll last you a very long time. You can just tear it up and use that sponge for your chipping or applying the paint that we're going to do. Now, one thing I always advise doing when you're creating something like this with rust, I'm going to split this video into like what I'm actually painting into like two halves, even though it's one item. One we're going to do quite rusty, and the other half we're going to make it not look as corroded. But I always say get some texture on it first of all. So I'm going to use typhus corrosion. As you can see here, I'm just working my way around and stippling. I'm just not being too like neat with it. If you want to put it in certain areas, that's up to you. Typhus corrosion is great for this because it's got some really fine grit, but I do find that if you do mix it with some other texture paints, you can also put it on. Now you can either put this on before your priming phase or even after like the typhus corrosion one, because it's not like going to really affect the colour. It's going to help a little bit. You can just apply it after you've primed as well. Now, colours. Firstly, the main beast itself, Rhinox Hide, Mornfang Brown, XV88, and also to finish it off some Riser Rust. Now it's not essential that you do use these paints, I just know these are probably the most accessible. However, feel free to mix these paints up a little bit. Might maybe use a bit more of one, more of another. You might use something like Troll Slayer Orange or some yellows in there, and again this just comes down to you and your preference, but feel free to experiment and get different looks with your rust and your weathering. There's nothing saying that you do have to use these exact colours. So first of all, I've got my big stipple brush and I've just got Rhinox Hide watered down 50-50, and I'm just literally splodging this over everywhere. I'm going over absolutely everything and just getting all your crevices and creases, and doing it this way. It's just, in my eyes, as fast as doing it with an airbrush, because if you're going to thin your paints down, you might have to go over it a couple of times with your airbrush, but I just find stippling it, because again, the reason I'm stippling it and using the sponge is because I want to get that texture. And if you look at actual like rust, it has got so much different variation, tones, and texture, and I tend to get a lot of inspiration, like with the oranges and yellows especially. I'm really, a little secret of mine, I'm obsessed with the Titanic, and if you look at the rusticles that form on the actual Titanic itself, you'll see that you can use so much different variation in tones and colours. But get your Rhinox Hide and splodge it and splash it everywhere over your primer. It doesn't matter if there's some black showing through in areas, this is just going to add to our effect and help everything come together in the end. Next up, we're switching to our Baylor Brown, and I'm going to be using the sponge for this. The reason I like to use a sponge is because you get the finer dots and the grit, and literally it's just dabbing it in your paint. And again, if you want to thin it to get different ratios, again, it's all experimentation. If you've got something like this where you've got like a panel and you just want to experiment with the dots and everything like that, or even just get some old sprues if you want to glue some of them together and get some metal paneling or whatever, and just so you can practice how much you want to dilute it. If you want it thicker in areas, again, it's all about that variation. It's just literally working your way through it. And then obviously it goes without saying in this tutorial is then we're going to switch up to XV88, and then I start splodging that here, there and everywhere as well. As I go up the colours from the Baylor Brown, I tend not to go as crazy. Again, this is just I'm not going to keep saying it, but your preference on how much you want it to actually do. And then we're finally going to switch to our orange, which is our Riser Rust, and we're just going to dab that. Be quite liberal with that. If you're not liberal, sorry, just be quite sparing with it, because it is a really saturated colour and it can sort of overdo it if you're going for more like a realistic effect. Again, it depends on how much you want it to stand out on that battlefield. But yeah, just be careful with the oranges and the rust. It doesn't matter if you go too crazy, because later on in the video where I'm going to go over some ways that you can dull it down a little bit, and with different products and stuff, it can actually go into our favour with a little bit more orange. But just experiment, try it out, and you'll find that you'll find your own little niche to the actual rust that you do like itself. Now at this stage, this is what I call our rust base done, dusted and complete. So now if I were going to do like a tank, I could literally go on now, put some chippy medium on, spray some colour on it and start chipping away. Or you can just leave it as this, as like a nice rust base. Now we're going to jump into like the halves and how we can take that to the next level. So the first thing that we're going to do is get something like a steel, and what we're going to do is highlight. So this is going to be some rust that's started to corrode a little bit. So maybe if you're going to do a weapon like a sword or something, this is where you're going to dry brush some metallics on. So what I'm going to do is you can use, now for this you can use anything. Again, it depends. You can either do it by the stipple method, what we've just done, which is like using the sponge, which will work, but for me I prefer to dry brush. So get something like iron breaker, or like a gunmetal, like a darkish colour, and then if you want to put a tiny little bit of a lighter one on there, like Runfang steel or something, you can go ahead. And again, this depends on how silver that you want it. Now we're going to move into some products that are really going to enhance that rust effect, and you've probably guessed it, it is the Dirty Downs Rust. Now I do have a Dirty Downs Rust masterclass. Episode 1 is free. It's already on my YouTube, so there'll be a link in the description below if you want to know a little bit more about this product, but it is, I can only describe it as magic in a bottle. There are some more parts coming out to that, which I'm currently filming, which will only be available exclusive on my Patreon, which is not out as of the time of recording this video. If it is and you're watching this a little bit later on, it'll be in link, so they will be available on there. But what I'm doing here, I've got a sponge applicator, which if you watch the masterclass we'll get into a little bit further, but this is my favourite way to apply it. These are just makeup sponges that you can get off like Amazon. If you put something like women's eyebrow makeup sponges, these little guys will pop up. And on one side I've dampened it a little bit, because if you know a little bit about Dirty Downs Rust, it reacts different with water and temperature, and it is water soluble, which is a bonus. You don't need no mineral spirits or anything. So I've dampened one side with some water, and I'm just dabbing it here and there. Now another technique that I'm going to give away for free in this video is I like to get it chunky, so I'll, like here, I've dipped it in quite a lot, and I'll just leave it on, because it is like a fast drying thing. I'll leave it on the sponge for like 30 seconds to a minute, and then I'll start to apply it. And I'm just literally going over all the rust areas, and this, you'll see by the end of this video, it just completely changes everything. It even adds more texture, and the variation you get from this is something that would take a hell of a lot of time to do if you were just painting it on. Now you might be asking, why don't you just bang this straight over black and just be done with it and use the Dirty Downs Rust? Well, there's a number of reasons for that. Number one is it looks different on different surfaces depending on like your base coat. So if this was a silver base coat, it'd look completely different. If you were a black, it wouldn't be as intense. And also I do mix a little bit of the yellow version of the Dirty Downs rust in with it just to step up that variation. And also you don't get like the chunky nice texture, and the beauty of this is as well you can manipulate it. So I might go back in a little bit later on with like a wet cotton swab and just dampen it up and get it reacting, and you'll get lighter variation in with the Dirty Downs rust. One final thing we're going to do with the acrylics is add some streaks. Now the paint you've just seen is, well, it's marketed as a special effects paint, so I picked a few up to try them, but in my eyes it's just a very watered down thin colour. So all you could do is just get something like Troll Slayer orange or some yellows, or mix some of the brown in with a riser rust and just water it down to like a wash consistency. And we're going to go in there and apply like some streaks or some like more orange in the areas. This paint from Vallejo, it don't really do much in essence of like colour, or like it's got no like special properties or paint. To me it's just a really thinned down version of like an orange paint or a yellowy orange paint. So just go in there and work in your streaks. Now if you've got like cracks and stuff, put it in there, and it's just one little layer that you can add. If you've got like a miniature that's, you know, you've put paint on, you'd add this streaking down the armor, but again it's just one last little level variation that you can add. And then one last final thing I did, as you can see, there's like some whitey dusty stuff. Now again, this is in enamel. I'm just showing you how you can take it to the next level, and I just used some mineral spirits and added a little bit to give it a little bit more of a chalky dusty effect. One other final product that if you really want like the picture at the beginning where it looked really dusty and really awful and really corroded, that is just using pigment powder. So if you've got some like rust pigment powders, I think Amazon have some, or Vallejo do a set of like rust corrosion pigments, go on there and just dust this into some of the areas. Don't go overboard with it because it can look a little bit too much, but again it can just add to like that really realistic tone and look for the for the rust itself. As it's starting to dry and corrode away, it turns into like this audible rust like what you'd probably get on planet Mars. But these are just additional products if you want to take it to that next level. Not necessarily, but you know, this whole video is around the actual getting that base coat down, and then we can apply other little bits to the top of it to enhance what it is that we're trying to paint. So guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video. It's, you know, this is something that I use on pretty much 99.9% of all my rust products and rust ways I do rust. I hope it's been insightful, and if anything, I hope it's been able to open up a little bit of creativity for yourself to go out and experiment. You know, you don't have to get these additional products and stuff to achieve all these textures. Any sort of texture paint with the acrylics on top is going to be sufficient enough to create like a really good nice textured rust effect, and these little tweaks that we've added at the end can just be the final icing on the cake, little things that are just going to completely transform it and just enhance it that little bit more, make it look more like rust. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please remember to like, comment, share and all that for jazzle, and until next time guys, I'll catch you in my next video.